The galaxy knew fear. It had learned this lesson across 1,000 burning worlds, taught by a single creature whose name made stars tremble. Emperor Vorax the Eternal ruled from his throne of black iron, a being of terrible power who had crushed rebellion after rebellion for 300 years. His dominion stretched across 40 star systems, and every species within those borders lived under his shadow. Vorax was not born. He was made. The scientists of the old Kethrani Empire had created him in their laboratories, a perfect weapon of flesh and metal and something darker still. They had given him strength that could tear apart armored vehicles with bare hands. They had given him a mind that could process 1,000 streams of information at once. They had given him a body that healed from any wound, that shrugged off poison and disease and age itself. What they had not given him was mercy. And when their creation turned upon them, the Kethrani learned too late what they had unleashed. Now Vorax sat upon his throne in the Palace of Endless Night on the world called Dominax Prime. The palace was a monument to his power, a structure of black stone and twisted metal that reached toward the clouds. Its halls were filled with the treasures of conquered civilizations, the weapons of defeated enemies, the preserved bodies of those who had dared to challenge him. Guards in crimson armor stood at every doorway, their faces hidden behind masks of polished steel. Surveillance systems watched every corner. Defense systems could turn any room into a death trap at a moment's notice. The Emperor had reason for such caution. He was the most hated being in the known galaxy, and countless individuals had tried to end his reign. The list of assassination attempts filled entire databases. Professional killers, military strike teams, suicide bombers, poison masters, saboteurs, and desperate heroes had all made their attempts. None had succeeded. The Valathi sent their greatest assassin, a creature of shadow and silence named Crix, who could slip through any security system. Crix had killed 17 planetary governors before turning his attention to the Emperor. He spent 2 years infiltrating the palace, learning its secrets, waiting for the perfect moment. When that moment came, he struck from the darkness with a blade coated in the most lethal poison his people had ever created. Vorax caught the blade in his bare hand. The poison burned away against his enhanced flesh, leaving only a faint scar that healed within seconds. The Emperor had known about Crix from the moment the assassin entered the palace. He had watched. He had waited. He had allowed the creature to believe it had a chance, because Vorax found entertainment in hope. Then he had torn Crix apart with his own hands, slowly over the course of 3 days. The humans of the Terran colonies sent a team of their finest soldiers, warriors enhanced with the best technology their species could produce. Operation Silent Thunder, they called it. 20 soldiers in cutting-edge stealth armor, armed with weapons capable of destroying small moons. They came in the dead of night, breaching the palace walls with plasma charges, fighting their way through wave after wave of guards. They reached the throne room. They found Vorax waiting for them, seated upon his throne, utterly calm. He did not rise. He did not call for more guards. He simply watched as the soldiers surrounded him, their weapons trained upon his body. "Fire!" the team leader commanded. They fired. Plasma bolts and particle beams and explosive rounds tore into Vorax from every direction. The throne room filled with fire and smoke and the thunder of destruction. The attack lasted for 3 full minutes before the soldiers ran out of ammunition. When the smoke cleared, Vorax sat unchanged upon his throne. His clothing had been burned away, revealing the gray-green scales of his body, but his flesh was unmarked. He had not bothered to move. "Is that all?" the Emperor asked. He killed them one by one. He made each death unique. A small piece of art crafted from pain. The recordings of those deaths were broadcast across the Terran colonies as a warning. The Dreth Collective, a hive mind spanning 3 planets, believed that their unified consciousness could overwhelm Vorax's enhanced brain. They sent 1,000 of their strongest telepaths to assault his mind simultaneously. The psychic attack struck with the force of a supernova, enough mental power to shatter mountains. Vorax smiled. His mind, enhanced and reinforced beyond anything natural, absorbed the attack like an ocean absorbing a raindrop. Then he struck back. The feedback wave killed every telepath instantly. The shock traveled through the hive mind's network, burning out connection after connection. 3 million Dreth died that day, their minds fried by the Emperor's counterattack. The collective never fully recovered. There were other attempts. A genetically engineered virus designed specifically to target Vorax's unique biology. A temporal weapon meant to erase him from history. A nano-swarm programmed to disassemble him molecule by molecule. A dimensional trap meant to imprison him outside of reality. Each attempt failed. Each failure was punished with terrible violence. The galaxy learned to fear. The rebellions grew less frequent. Hope became a dangerous commodity. Among the countless servants who maintained the Palace of Endless Night was a human named Thomas Chen. He was unremarkable in every way that mattered to the Dominion's security systems. Middle-aged, average height, quiet demeanor, his record showed he had been born on a colony world called New Harmony, one of the first human settlements to fall under Vorax's control. His parents had died in the conquest. He had been taken as a child, raised in the labor camps, and eventually assigned to palace service due to his calm temperament and obedient nature. Thomas had worked in the palace for 23 years. He had started as a cleaner, scrubbing floors and emptying waste containers. Over time, his reliability and quiet efficiency had earned him better positions. Now he served in the Emperor's personal quarters, one of a small team responsible for maintaining the tyrant's private spaces. It was dangerous work. Vorax was unpredictable. His moods could shift without warning, and servants who displeased him often died badly. Thomas had seen colleagues killed for the smallest mistakes, a glass not polished to perfection, a meal served at the wrong temperature, a word spoken when silence was expected. Thomas survived because he was invisible. He moved quietly, worked efficiently, and never drew attention to himself. He kept his eyes down, his voice soft, his movements careful. He became part of the furniture, a presence so unremarkable that even Vorax's paranoid surveillance systems barely registered him as a person. But Thomas watched. Behind his downcast eyes, a sharp mind observed everything. He noticed that Vorax, despite his power, was utterly alone. The Emperor had no friends, no confidants, no one he trusted. He surrounded himself with guards who feared him, servants who trembled at his approach, and officials who lied to him constantly in hope of avoiding his wrath. His immortality had not brought him peace. Instead, it had brought him 300 years of isolation. Thomas noticed that Vorax never slept peacefully. Even with his enhanced body, the Emperor required rest, and during those hours, he was often troubled by something Thomas could not see. He would wake suddenly, his eyes wild, his hands clenched into fists. Sometimes he spoke names in his sleep, names that belonged to no one in his current court, ghosts from a past so distant that even Vorax might have forgotten their faces. Thomas noticed that Vorax took no pleasure in his food, his treasures, or his conquests. He went through the motions of eating because his body required fuel. He collected artifacts because that was what emperors did. He conquered worlds because there was nothing else to do. But joy was absent from his eyes. Even cruelty seemed to bore him, though he continued to practice it out of habit. Most importantly, Thomas noticed that Vorax watched him. It was subtle. A glance that lasted a fraction of a second too long. A pause in conversation when Thomas entered the room. A slight turning of the head to track his movements. The emperor had noticed something about the quiet servant, though he had not yet decided what to do about it. Thomas knew he should be afraid. Attention from Vorax meant death more often than not. But fear was a luxury he had abandoned long ago in the labor camps where he had learned that fear only made suffering worse. He continued his work, quiet and efficient, and he continued to watch. One evening, as Thomas was arranging the emperor's evening meal in the private dining chamber, Vorax spoke to him directly for the first time. "You have served here for many years, human." Thomas's hands did not shake as he placed a glass of filtered water beside the emperor's plate. "Yes, your eternity. 23 years. In all that time, you have never asked for anything, never complained, never made a mistake significant enough to warrant my attention." Vorax's yellow eyes studied him with cold curiosity. "Every other servant in this palace fears me. They shake when I pass. They sweat when I speak. You do not. Why?" Thomas considered the question carefully. Lying to Vorax was pointless. The emperor could detect deception as easily as breathing. "I learned in the camps that fear makes things worse," Thomas said quietly. "It does not protect. It does not help. It only adds suffering to suffering. So I stopped being afraid." Vorax was silent for a long moment. "You stopped being afraid," he repeated, as if fear were a coat you could simply remove. "It took time," Thomas admitted. "Many years, much practice. But yes." "And what did you find beneath the fear, human? Hate? The desire for revenge?" Thomas shook his head slowly. "Only tiredness, your eternity. And eventually, something like peace." The emperor dismissed him with a wave of his hand, but Thomas saw something in those ancient yellow eyes that he had never seen before. Not anger, not cruelty, not the cold amusement that usually lurked there. Something closer to confusion, perhaps even curiosity. It was a small thing, a crack in a wall that had stood for 3 centuries. But cracks, given time and the right pressure, could bring down even the mightiest walls. Thomas returned to his quarters that night and sat in the darkness, thinking. The other servants were asleep, exhausted by their constant fear. Thomas was not tired. He was thinking about what he had seen in the emperor's eyes, and he was thinking about what it might mean. He knew, with a certainty that came from somewhere beyond logic, that his life was about to change. He did not know how, or why, or what the change would bring. But after 23 years of patient waiting, something had finally shifted in the foundations of the palace. Thomas closed his eyes and allowed himself, for the first time in many years, to hope. The weeks that followed Thomas's first conversation with the emperor were strange ones in the Palace of Endless Night. Nothing changed in the obvious ways. The guards still marched. The surveillance system still watched. The officials still lied and schemed and trembled. But something had shifted in the emperor's private quarters, something so subtle that only Thomas could perceive it. Vorax began to speak to him, not often, and never about anything of importance. Small comments about the weather on distant worlds, observations about the food, questions about Thomas's routine. The conversations were brief, sometimes lasting only a few sentences, but they were conversations nonetheless. And for an emperor who had not held a genuine conversation in decades, this was remarkable. Thomas answered honestly. He told Vorax about his work, about the small pleasures he found in a job well done, about the gardens he passed on his way to the servants' quarters. He did not flatter. He did not praise. He simply spoke as one being to another, without the fear that colored every other interaction the emperor had. "You speak to me as if I were ordinary," Vorax observed one morning, as Thomas arranged fresh linens in the sleeping chamber. "I speak to you as one person to another," Thomas replied. "Whether you are ordinary is not for me to decide. Others would call that disrespect." Others are not me." Vorax made a sound that might have been a laugh, though Thomas was not sure the Emperor remembered how to laugh properly. "No, they are not." The other servants noticed the change. They watched Thomas with new eyes, wondering what magic he possessed that allowed him to speak with the Emperor and survive. Some approached him, hoping to learn his secrets. Thomas had no secrets to share. He simply continued to do what he had always done. He worked quietly. He spoke honestly. He did not ask for anything. News of the strange human servant began to spread through the palace, and from there into the wider dominion. In the intelligence agencies and resistance cells scattered across 40 star systems, analysts studied reports with growing interest. Who was this Thomas Chen, and what was his game? The Velati believed he was a deep-cover operative, playing a long game of manipulation. The Terran resistance hoped he was one of their own, a hero waiting for the right moment to strike. The Dreth Collective, still recovering from their catastrophic telepathic attack, scanned him repeatedly from orbit, searching for any sign of unusual mental activity. They found nothing. Thomas was exactly what he appeared to be: a servant, a survivor, a man who had found a way to live without fear in a galaxy ruled by terror. As spring came to Dominax Prime, the Emperor did something unprecedented. He ordered that Thomas Chen be assigned exclusively to his personal service, removing him from the regular rotation of servants. From now on, Thomas alone would tend to the Emperor's private chambers. Thomas alone would serve his meals. Thomas alone would be permitted to enter his presence without announcement. The court was scandalized. Never in 3 centuries had Vorax shown such favor to anyone, let alone a human servant. Whispers filled the corridors. Conspiracies were imagined. Assassination plots were proposed and discarded. Everyone assumed that Thomas must have some hidden power, some secret weapon, some leverage that allowed him to manipulate the Emperor. Thomas had none of these things. He had only his quiet presence and his willingness to treat Vorax as something other than a monster. One evening, Thomas found the Emperor standing at the great window of his private chamber, staring out at the city below. Dominax Prime's capital spread across the landscape like a cancer, all black towers and industrial complexes and the constant movement of military vehicles. It was a city built for war, a city without beauty or joy. "Do you know why I conquered the galaxy, human?" Vorax asked without turning from the window. Thomas set down the tray of food he had been carrying. "Many would say you did it for power." Power. Vorax's voice was flat. "What good is power when there is no one left to share it with? When everyone you meet either fears you or wants to destroy you? When every word spoken to you is a lie? Every smile a mask?" Thomas stood in silence, understanding that the Emperor did not want answers. He wanted something far more rare. He wanted someone to listen. "The scientists who made me believed they were creating a weapon," Vorax continued. "They were right. I am a weapon. I was built to destroy, to dominate, to crush all resistance. They programmed these drives into my very being. I cannot turn them off any more than you can stop your heart from beating." He turned to face Thomas, and for the first time, Thomas saw something like pain in those ancient yellow eyes. "But they made me too well. They gave me intelligence enough to understand what I am, to know that I am a monster, to feel the weight of every life I have taken, every world I have burned, every hope I have crushed." Vorax's hands clenched at his sides. "I have lived for 300 years, human. 300 years of blood and fire and screaming, and I cannot die. I have tried. Believe me, I have tried." Thomas did believe him. He saw the truth of it in the Emperor's eyes, in the weary lines of his body, in the heaviness of his voice. Vorax was not a tyrant enjoying his power. He was a prisoner of his own creation, trapped in an immortal body with drives he could not control and a conscience he could not silence. "The assassins who come for me do not understand," Vorax said. "They think they are fighting evil. Perhaps they are. But they are also trying to give me a gift I cannot receive. They are trying to grant me peace through death. And I am built too well to die." Thomas stepped forward, his movements slow and careful. "And if peace could come another way?" Vorax's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "You said you cannot stop being what you are. Perhaps that is true. But what you do with what you are, that might be different. You speak of redemption." The Emperor's laugh was bitter. "After everything I have done, after the trillions of deaths, the burned worlds, the civilizations I have destroyed, what redemption could possibly be enough?" "I do not know," Thomas admitted. "I am only a servant. I have no wisdom to offer, no grand plan. But I know this much. The fact that you feel the weight of what you have done means that you are not only a weapon. Weapons do not feel guilt. Weapons do not question themselves. You are something more than what they made you." Vorax stared at him for a long moment. In the Emperor's eyes, Thomas saw something struggling to emerge, something that had been buried for centuries beneath layers of pain and power and isolation. "You are either very brave or very foolish, human." "Probably both," Thomas said quietly. "Most humans are." Days passed, weeks, months. The conversations continued, growing longer and deeper each time. Vorax spoke of his past, of the Kathrani scientists who had created him, of the wars of conquest that had followed, of the brief moments of connection he had experienced before his own paranoia and violence had destroyed them. Thomas listened. He did not judge. He did not condemn. He simply listened, offering the Emperor something no one else in the galaxy could give him: acceptance without fear. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, changes began to appear in the Dominion's governance. A regulation was loosened here. A punishment was reduced there. The quotas for the labor camps were decreased by 10%, then 20%. Food shipments to the outer colonies were increased. The surveillance systems in the capital city were partially deactivated. The court noticed these changes and debated their meaning endlessly. Some believed the Emperor was growing weak, that the time for rebellion had finally come. Others suspected a trap, a new strategy designed to expose hidden enemies. No one guessed the truth, that a quiet human servant was slowly, patiently helping a monster rediscover his humanity. Thomas asked for nothing. He made no demands, set no conditions, proposed no bargains. He simply continued to be present, to speak honestly, to treat the Emperor as a person rather than a god or a devil. And in that presence, in that simple human kindness, Vorax began to find something he had thought lost forever. One night, the Emperor woke from a nightmare to find Thomas sitting beside his bed, a cup of water in his hands. "How did you know?" Vorax asked, his voice rough with sleep. "You always have nightmares when the spring storms come," Thomas said. "I thought you might want something to drink." Vorax took the water and drank. His hands, which could crush stone, trembled slightly. "The dreams are always the same, the faces of the dead, calling out to me, asking why." "What do you tell them?" "Nothing. There is nothing to say." Thomas nodded slowly. "Perhaps there will be someday. Perhaps the answer will come through what you do now, not what you did then." Vorax set down the cup and looked at Thomas with eyes that held something they had never held before. Not power, not cruelty, not the cold calculation of a tyrant. Something warmer, something almost fragile. "Why do you help me?" the Emperor asked. "I conquered your world. I killed your parents. I took everything from you. Why do you not hate me?" Thomas was silent for a long moment, considering the question. "I did hate you once. In the camps, when I was young and full of anger. I dreamed of killing you. I imagined it in 1,000 different ways. What changed? I grew tired, Thomas said simply. Hatred is heavy. It weighs you down, steals your strength, poisons everything it touches. I carried it for years before I realized it was hurting me more than it could ever hurt you. So I set it down. And what did you pick up instead? Thomas smiled, a small and quiet expression. Nothing. Empty hands are lighter. They can hold whatever comes. Vorax was silent for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was very soft. I do not deserve your kindness, Thomas. It was the first time the Emperor had used his name. Deserve has nothing to do with it, Thomas replied. Kindness is not a payment. It is a gift, and gifts are given freely, or not at all. That night, for the first time in 300 years, Emperor Vorax slept without nightmares. And in the morning, he made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. He summoned his highest officials to the throne room and announced that there would be changes to the Dominion's policies, significant changes. Changes that would ease the suffering of billions of beings across 40 star systems. The officials listened in stunned silence. Some wept, some fainted. One elderly advisor simply died of shock, his heart's giving out from the sheer impossibility of what he was hearing. A new era was beginning, and at its center, unnoticed and unremarkable, stood a quiet human servant who had done what no assassin, no army, no weapon had ever managed to do. He had reached the heart of a monster, and in that heart, he had found something worth saving. The changes came slowly at first, then faster and faster like water breaking through a dam. Emperor Vorax announced the abolition of the labor camps. He ordered the release of political prisoners. He reduced the military's presence in civilian areas. He allowed freedom of movement between star systems for the first time in 2 centuries. The galaxy watched in disbelief. Intelligence agencies worked overtime, trying to understand what was happening. The consensus among most analysts was that Vorax was dying, that some unknown disease was finally claiming his immortal body. Others believed he had been replaced by a clone or a shapeshifter. A few suggested that the galaxy had simply gone mad. Only Thomas knew the truth. The monster was learning to be a man. It was not an easy process. Centuries of programming and habit could not be overcome overnight. There were setbacks, moments when the old cruelty surged back and Vorax ordered executions or crackdowns. Each time Thomas was there, not to condemn or criticize, but simply to wait until the storm passed and the Emperor remembered who he was trying to become. I do not know if I can do this, Vorax admitted one evening, after a particularly difficult day. A rebellion had erupted on a frontier world, and every instinct in his enhanced body had screamed for him to crush it utterly. He had resisted. He had ordered negotiations instead, but the effort had left him shaking with suppressed violence. You are doing it, Thomas said quietly. Each time you choose differently, you become something new. And what if I fail? What if the old programming wins? Then you try again, as many times as it takes. Vorax looked at his hands, the hands that had killed so many. You have more faith in me than I deserve. Perhaps. But faith is also a gift, freely given. The months continued to pass. The reforms deepened. Vorax began meeting with representatives of the conquered species, listening to their grievances, working to address them. He established councils to govern the various star systems, gradually transferring power away from his absolute rule. He began dismantling the war machine that had built his empire, redirecting resources toward reconstruction and healing. The resistance movements, which had spent decades planning the Emperor's assassination, found themselves in a strange position. Their enemy was becoming something else, something they had never imagined possible. Some refused to believe it, insisting that the changes were a trick. Others cautiously welcomed the reforms while remaining suspicious of their source. Among the Terran colonies, debate raged about Thomas Chen. When his identity and role became known, opinions split sharply. Some called him a traitor, a collaborator who had made peace with his parents' murderer. Others called him a hero, a man who had achieved through patience what violence could never accomplish. Most simply could not understand how he had done what he had done. Thomas did not care about their opinions. He continued his work, continued his conversations with Vorax, continued the slow and careful process of helping a tyrant find his way back to something like humanity. 1 year after the reforms began, Vorax made his most dramatic announcement yet. He would abdicate his throne. He would surrender his powers to a newly formed galactic council, composed of representatives from all the species under his rule. He would submit himself to judgment for his crimes. The announcement sent shockwaves across the galaxy. For 3 centuries, Vorax had been the center of power, the fixed point around which everything else revolved. The idea of a galaxy without him was almost inconceivable. Thomas was with the Emperor when he made the announcement, standing quietly in the shadows of the throne room as Vorax spoke to the assembled court. "I was created to be a weapon," the Emperor said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "For 300 years I fulfilled that purpose. I conquered and destroyed and ruled through fear. I told myself it was my nature, that I had no choice. But I was wrong." He paused, and his yellow eyes found Thomas in the crowd. "A human taught me that choice is always possible, that even a monster can choose to be something else, that the chains we believe bind us are often chains we have forged ourselves." The court listened in stunned silence. "I cannot undo what I have done. I cannot bring back the dead or heal the wounds I have inflicted, but I can choose from this moment forward to be something other than what I was made to be. I can choose to step aside and allow others to build what I could only destroy." He rose from his throne, the black iron seat that had been the symbol of his power for so long. "I surrender my authority to the beings of this galaxy. Judge me as you will. I am ready." The trial of Emperor Vorax lasted for 3 months. Witnesses came from every corner of the Dominion to testify about his crimes. The evidence filled thousands of data archives. The suffering he had caused was documented in terrible detail. Thomas attended every session, sitting in the public gallery, watching quietly. Vorax never looked at him, but Thomas knew the Emperor was aware of his presence. It seemed to give him strength. The verdict was never in doubt. Vorax was found guilty of crimes against sentient life, against civilization, against the fundamental principles of decency that bound the galaxy together. The punishment, however, was the subject of intense debate. Many called for execution, though everyone knew Vorax could not be killed by conventional means. Others proposed imprisonment in the most secure facility that could be constructed. A few suggested exile to some distant, uninhabited world. In the end, it was Vorax himself who proposed the solution. "I cannot die," he told the council, "but I can serve. For the rest of my existence, however long that may be, I will work to repair what I have broken. I will use the strength that was given to me for destruction to rebuild instead. I will go to the worlds I have burned and help them grow again. I will not rest until I have given back more than I have taken." The council accepted his proposal. It was not justice in any traditional sense. Nothing could truly balance the scales after 3 centuries of tyranny. But it was something new, something unprecedented, something that offered at least the possibility of redemption. As Vorax prepared to leave Dominax Prime for his first assignment, a devastated colony world that needed infrastructure rebuilt, Thomas came to see him one last time. They stood together in the empty throne room, the great seat of power now cold and abandoned. Outside, the galaxy was reorganizing itself, building new structures of governance, healing old wounds. Inside, two individuals faced each other in the quiet of the evening. "You saved me," Vorax said simply. Thomas shook his head. "I only showed you what was already there. The choice was yours. The choice would have been impossible without you." Vorax's voice was heavy with emotion he still did not fully know how to express. "You gave me something no one else could. You treated me as a person when everyone else saw only a monster. You offered kindness when I deserved only hatred. You believed I could change when I had given up on myself." "Humans are stubborn that way," Thomas said with a small smile. "We tend to believe in impossible things." Vorax was silent for a moment. "Will you come with me? To the colony worlds?" "I could use someone I trust." Thomas considered the offer. It was tempting. The work Vorax was undertaking was important, perhaps the most important work in the galaxy. And despite everything, Thomas had come to care for the being who had once been his worst enemy. But there were others who needed what Thomas could offer. Other monsters who might be reached by quiet kindness. Other broken things that might be healed. "I think I am needed here," Thomas said gently. "There are others in this palace, in this government, who have known only fear and cruelty. They will need someone to show them a different way." Vorax nodded slowly. He understood. "Then this is goodbye. For now. The galaxy is smaller than it used to be. We will meet again." They stood in silence for a moment longer. Then, for the first and last time, the former emperor of the Dominion embraced the human servant who had saved him. It was an awkward gesture, unfamiliar to a being who had known only violence for 3 centuries. But it was genuine. "Thank you," Vorax whispered, "for everything." "Go and do good," Thomas replied. "That is all the thanks I need." Vorax left that night, departing on a transport ship that would take him to the first of many worlds he would help rebuild. The galaxy watched him go, still uncertain what to make of this strange new chapter in its history. In the years that followed, Thomas Chen became a legend. Not the kind of legend that fills holovids and history books, but the quieter kind passed from person to person in whispered stories. The human who had done what no weapon could do. The servant who had brought down an empire with nothing but patience and kindness. Other species studied his methods, trying to understand what made humans capable of such things. They analyzed his psychological profile, examined his brain scans, reviewed every recorded conversation he had had with Vorax. They found nothing special. Thomas was ordinary in every measurable way. But that, perhaps, was the point. Humans were ordinary. They were small and weak and short-lived compared to many species in the galaxy. They had no natural weapons, no exceptional senses, no particular advantages. What they had was something harder to measure, a capacity for connection that crossed all boundaries, a stubbornness that refused to accept that things could not change, a belief, foolish and beautiful and deeply human, that even monsters could be saved. Thomas lived for many more years, serving in various capacities as the new Galactic Council established itself. He never sought power or recognition. He continued to do what he had always done, moving quietly through the corridors of power, offering kindness to those who needed it, listening to those who had forgotten what it felt like to be heard. When he finally died, of simple old age in a simple room in the same palace where he had once scrubbed floors, representatives from 100 worlds attended his memorial service. Vorax himself came, looking older somehow despite his immortality, his yellow eyes carrying a weight that had nothing to do with his physical body. "He was the bravest being I ever knew," Vorax said in his eulogy. not because he faced death without fear, but because he faced a monster with kindness. He saw what I could become when I saw only what I had been. He gave me mercy when I deserved none. The former emperor paused, his voice rough with emotion. The galaxy remembers assassins and warriors and conquerors. We build monuments to those who take lives, but Thomas Chen reminds us that the greatest victories are won not by destroying our enemies, but by transforming them. He taught me, and through me the galaxy, that there is no being so lost that kindness cannot reach them. Thomas Chen was buried on New Harmony, the world where he had been born, in a small cemetery overlooking the sea. His grave was marked with a simple stone bearing words in the old Terran language. He showed us another way. Across the galaxy, in the centuries that followed, humans became known not for their strength or their technology or their military might. They became known for something rarer and more precious, a strange and stubborn faith that compassion could reach where violence could not, a willingness to see the person within the monster. And in the end, that faith changed everything. The dominion that Vorax had built through blood and fire was slowly replaced by something better. A confederation of free peoples, working together to build rather than destroy. It was not perfect. No society ever is. But it was an improvement, a step towards something more just and more humane. And it had all begun with a quiet servant who refused to be afraid, who chose kindness over hatred, who proved that the most powerful force in the universe was not the ability to take life, but the ability to change it. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy, not weapons or technology or conquest, but the simple, radical, world-changing power of mercy. And that, in the end, was what brought down the Despot. Not violence, not hatred, not revenge, just one human being, treating a monster like a person, until the monster remembered how to be one.